Alright y'all, it's Wednesday morning and it's pretty cold out there. Forecast snow later, so I hope the weather forecast is wrong. I do not like snow. But today is as good a day as any to be a 2-video day. And in this video I want to talk about the letter that Roberta Laundrie wrote to Brian Laundrie. The public has no access to that letter. She's broken her silence after what? How long? Gabby was found deceased on September 19th, 2021. Roberta has written a letter about the letter. Now, lots of people have covered this. All the kind of major news channels have covered this. Gabby Petito was trending on Twitter last night. You may well have seen the letter about the letter, but I'm going to give you my thoughts on it. And I am going to read Roberta's letter about the letter at the end of this video. So in case you haven't seen that. And I'll leave a link to this article, which is on WFLA.com, in the description box. Now, if you're in Europe, you'll need a VPN to be able to access this. Now, I'm sure other news outlets have got the letter of the letter, but just in case you can't get access to it, I'll copy and paste the entire wording of the letter in a pinned comment, because I think it'll be too many characters to put in the description box. Alright, so this is WFLA.com, and Hey JB from WFLA Now did a great live stream yesterday talking all about the letter of the letter. That's worth checking out if you're interested. So let's go through this article, and I've got some thoughts on this. Brian Laundrie's mother explained burn after reading letter sought in Gabby Petito's lawsuit. You see, the cynic in me, which is probably accurate in my opinion in this case, is that Roberta's only speaking out because there's a lawsuit and she does not want the letter that she wrote to Brian being released to the public. And if this is discussed in court, it could well turn out that the judge orders the release of this letter. But Roberta is rattled about it, which is a little bit interesting in itself. So, Roberta Laundrie is speaking out for the first time about a letter she wrote to her son, Brian Laundrie, that she claims has nothing to do with Gabby Petito, but rather is a quirky letter she wrote to help repair their relationship. Now, this is the first we're hearing about the strained relationship between Roberta Laundrie and her son Brian. In fact, we've got very little information about Brian Laundrie, about what his life was like. Him and Gabby lived with Roberta and Christopher Laundrie for over a year before they went on that fateful 4-month trip across the USA. Roberta's attorneys filed a motion for a protective order in Sarasota County Circuit Court on Monday, seeking to block the attempts by Petito's parents, Joe Petito and Nicole Smith, to make the burn after reading letter written to Brian Laundrie admissible as evidence in the upcoming civil trial between the two families. The attorney for Petito and Smith claims the letter makes reference to a shovel, burying a body, and helping Brian get out of prison. Now, Pat Riley, that's a good Irish name, was on Hey JB's WFLA broadcast yesterday, and he was only on for the first, 15 minutes or so, and he's read the letter, but he said he only saw it briefly in the FBI office when this letter came to light. So he said he doesn't remember, the specific wording of the letter, but there was a reference to a shovel, burying a body, and helping Brian get out of prison. Now, she says this is a quirky letter to repair their relationship. She's using references from books that her and Brian shared a love of. Okay, I can go with that to a certain extent, honestly. But if this was such a private letter between a mother and a son, I have one question. And I'm sure that a lot of people share this question. Why would you write a letter to your son when he's living in the house? If you want to write a quirky letter to somebody, usually it's when they're not there, isn't it? Let's say Brian was living elsewhere in the country and their relationship had been strained. Maybe she'd write him a quirky letter. Maybe she wouldn't text him or email him or message him on social media. Maybe she's old school and maybe she doesn't really use the internet and maybe she does write letters. We don't know because we don't know anything about Roberta Laundrie. We don't really know anything about Brian Laundrie. So how can we, the public, ascertain whether Roberta is telling the truth? Without further information, we've got no context to that relationship between Roberta and Brian that became strained while they were living in the same house. We've got no context as to, does Roberta Laundrie routinely write letters? Is that how she communicates? Is that her best mode of communication? If it is, then it does add some credibility to the fact that Roberta wanted to write this quirky letter in the first place. Anyway, let's move on. In support of the motion against the letter becoming public, Roberta Laundrie wrote a letter to the court claiming the burn after reading letter was written months before Gabby and Brian left on their cross-country road trip in the summer of 2021. Although I do not know the exact date I wrote the letter, I do know I wrote it and gave it to Brian before Brian and Gabby left Florida for New York, which was on June 2nd, 2021. They spent some time with Gabby's parents and then they set off on this trip heading west. So Roberta is saying that she wrote that letter while Brian was living in the house. Again, the context to this is all important and we just don't have that context. But if she wrote the letter in May in an attempt to repair their relationship before Brian went on this fateful trip, yes, I can buy that. If that relationship was so strained and she felt it was the only way she could communicate with him. Roberta says she and Brian shared a love for books, such as The Runaway Bunny and Little Bear. She claims one such book, Burn After Writing, was often the subject of a joke between Brian and Gabby, and is the reason she wrote Burn After Reading on the envelope that contained the letter to her son. In short, I was trying to connect with Brian and repair our relationship as he was planning to leave home. I had hoped this letter would remind him of how much I loved him, said Roberta. So, quoting children's books and then this Burn After Writing book. So, I had to look up the Burn After Writing book, and there seems to be more than one version of this, so I don't know which one is the genuine one. But I found this on Amazon.com. The author, Sharon Jones. Thanks for dropping by and welcome to my Amazon author page. I'm the author of the original Burn After Writing, a self-discovery book that encourages you, the reader, to ask yourself where you've come from, where you are now, and ultimately where you are going. Think of it as self-therapy. So the Burn After Writing book and then her new one both began their journey right here at my kitchen table in the northeast of England as I sought the answer to some of the questions that I had in my own life. In my spare time, I like to write lists, start conversations and find new ways of questioning just who I am and where I'm going. Okay. Burn After Writing the book is like a self-reflective journal. And once you've written down your innermost thoughts, you burn them. So was Brian having some kind of emotional turmoil and Roberta was trying to get through to him using that kind of approach? We don't know because we don't have any context. Stephen Bertolino, the longtime family attorney for the Laundries, who is seeking to be removed as a co-defendant in the lawsuit, has previously said that the Burn After Reading letter Roberta wrote to Brian was personal between a mother and a son. Yeah, but I think any potential embarrassment that you might have about writing this quirky letter that includes a shovel, burying a body, and Brian going to prison, you know, it's very coincidental, isn't it, that these things were written at all, especially if they were written in May before Brian murdered his girlfriend Gabby. It's awfully coincidental. Roberta, in her letter to the court, said the note to Brian was an attempt to repair their strained relationship. So it was to reach out to Brian while he and I were experiencing a difficult period in our relationship. Brian and I always had a very open and communicative relationship, And in the months prior to the trip, our relationship had become strained. Brian and I shared a love of stories, and some of the language in the letter is using similar phrases to describe the depth of a mother's love. Roberta admits that her letter does contain references that some would think are about her son and Gabby, but she claims that there's no connection between her words and what happened to the couple. But the fact that there's no date on this letter, we've only got Roberta's word that this letter isn't relevant because it was written before the trip. We've only got Roberta's word for that. Can she prove it? If she can't prove it, surely it should be admissible in court. You know, ultimately, this is going to go to a jury. So surely it should be admissible in court and let the jury decide. So this is what Stephen Bertolino said. The FBI gave it to me and I still have it. It's in the possession of the attorney that was the spokesman for the Laundries during the time that Gabby was missing and the time that Brian was missing. A massive search, and then Roberta and Chris turn up and find his remains in his backpack, like, super quick. And he also said, don't get caught up in the hype. Context is everything. Context is everything. That's what I'm saying. We have no context, so how can we judge that this letter of the letter is honest? We've got no context, so surely it should be admissible in court and let a jury decide. Riley, so that's Petito's lawyer, has filed for the letter to be part of the discovery process in the lawsuit Petito's parents have filed against the Laundries and Bertolino. Court hearing specifically on whether the letter will be admissible has not yet been scheduled. So that hearing will be held, and at some point, at a later date, there is going to be a jury trial about this. And on News Nation, just last night, Brian Entin said it again. This letter, the Burn After Reading letter, was found in Brian's backpack when they found his remains. So he actually had the letter on him. Well, why would he have the letter on him? Roberta is saying that it wasn't found in his backpack. Look, I've been thinking about what would the real purpose of that letter be. Brian got back from his trip driving Gabby's van on the 1st of September. Around the 6th of September, they went for that little camping trip, didn't they? And then they got back, and Joe Petito and Nicole Smith, Gabby's parents, were trying to get in touch with the Laundries because they'd not heard from Gabby, they didn't know where she was. And once Brian returned on his own, well, clearly that's incredibly worrying. So Gabby was reported missing on the 11th of September. And then just a couple of days after that, Brian went missing, despite Northport police saying that they knew where he was. And then they had to admit that they mistook Brian for his mother. I don't know, guys. This is just insane. And then it took till October the something for his body to be found in Carlton Reserve. We know that the laundry house was being surveilled. And not only were there reporters and protesters outside the whole time that Brian was missing, but the police had also set up cameras. Now, if you were paranoid, think about it, if you were really paranoid that you were being surveilled wherever you went, and maybe paranoid that they could listen to your phone calls, or if they got your phone, it would be evidence. How would you communicate? If you were concerned about being surveilled, you were totally paranoid, even in your own home you were paranoid, and you knew not to write that down on social media in a private message or in a text, what would you do? You'd go old school, and you'd write it as a physical letter that Brian was meant to burn after reading. Stephen Bertolino's right. Context is everything. All right. Before signing off, I'm going to read you this letter. I, Roberta Laundrie, am a defendant in the above-styled cause, and do hereby swear or affirm that I fully understand the meaning of all the terms of this affidavit. I wrote the letter requested by plaintiff's second request for production. I wrote the letter to my son Brian Laundrie on or about the end of May 2021, although I do not know the exact date I wrote the letter. I do know that I wrote it and gave it to Brian before Brian and Gabby left Florida for New York, which was on June the 2nd. Gabby and Brian went from Florida to New York before they went out west. The purpose of the letter was to reach out to Brian while he and I were experiencing a difficult period in our relationship. Brian and I had a very open and communicative relationship. In the months prior to the trip, our relationship had become strained. Brian and I shared a love of stories, and some of the language in the letter was using similar phrases to describe the depth of a mother's love. The two books that come to mind are A Runaway Bunny and Little Bear. In addition, Gabby had given Brian a book called Burn After Writing, which contains printed questions to which the reader responds by writing their answers on the page. The back of the book instructs the reader to create a secret book and then destroy by burn after writing. The bottom of the back cover says, write, burn, repeat. Brian, Gabby and I often joked about this book and the importance of being able to express yourself. If you were embarrassed or simply did not want anyone to know your thoughts or feelings, then the book offered the perfect solution by telling you to burn it. This is where my message to Brian came from, and I wrote on the cover of the letter for Brian to burn after reading. In short, I was trying to connect with Brian and repair our relationship, as he was planning to leave home, and I hope this letter would remind him of how much I loved him. There were some other phrases that I used in the letter which are not found in the books I shared with Brian as a child. Presumably about shovels, burning bodies, and getting someone out of prison. However, these phrases were common enough in our circle of friends and family. All right, so you talk about burning bodies regularly, do you? To describe who you could turn to in the most troubling times of your life. Well, the most troubling time of his life, surely, was after he murdered his girlfriend. Just saying. While I use words that seem to have connection with Brian's actions and his taking of Gabby's life, I never would have fathomed the events that unfolded months later between Brian and Gabby would reflect the words in my letter. The words in the letter could never have been a comment on that tragic situation, as they were written many months before. My words to Brian were meant to convey my love and support for my son, though a light-hearted and quirky reminder that my love for him was not diminished and could not be shaken by miles of separation we would soon be faced with. Although a few of the words in the letter are being quoted by others as having a connection to the case, all of the words taken together and in context of the reason the letter was written show that there was no connection. In addition, there has been some speculation that this letter was in Brian's possession or in his backpack when he died, insinuating that I gave it to him as he left my home on September 13th, 2021. But that is not true, because the FBI had this letter in their possession and questioned members of my family about it prior to October 20th, 2021, when my husband and I found Brian's remains in the reserve. I repeat that the letter I wrote to Brian before he left with Gabby for that fateful trip was nothing more than a private communication between myself and my son, and I never expected anyone else would read it. In some way, I did not want anyone else to read it, as I know it's not the type of letter a mother writes to her adult son, and I did not want to embarrass Brian. Well, it's too late for that now. He's dead, he's not going to be embarrassed. That's why I wrote burn after reading on the envelope, and I knew that Brian would know what it meant. I am now appreciative that he actually kept it. Signed, Roberta Laundrie. Okay, so what's so embarrassing? Like now, like all this time later, what's so embarrassing? Again, let the court decide, let the jury decide whether this letter is relevant. Unless you can prove, Roberta, that this was written in May, then I say your words don't mean anything, honestly. And if this wasn't found in Brian's backpack, well, fair enough. If it was found when the FBI searched Brian's room, well, fair enough. You could have given it to him in the 2 days between Gabby being reported missing, when all hell broke loose, presumably, in your household, and September 13th, when Brian took that trip to Carlton Reserve to kill himself. So that means nothing either, in my opinion. All right, guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. I've been Michelle, hope you're well. I'll see you in the next video. It's goodbye from Miss Tillington and Miss Cassie Springer. Bye, guys.